That's a great story. And I have to say, laughter in your home, being close to it at times, is a wonderful gift, and just loving on your children. And they're not going to remember a lot of the other things, but they will remember feeling loved and secure. And as I look back, I think I was more frustrated, not with my children, but with my situation.
Right.
And really, if you can separate that and see, sometimes I was frustrated. My house wasn't perfect, and I wanted it perfect. They didn't act perfectly, and I wanted, you know, it wasn't my children, it was the situation I found myself in. And I went from being a single working woman within 2 years to being married and having 2 children. And where did my life go? How did I end up here? And so I was more frustrated, and it really helped for me to have other people in my life, other women who could speak into that, for me to really, for God to open up my eyes to see what I was doing. And I wasn't, more times than not, I didn't do the right thing. And I had to apologize, although they never said that. I wish they had, because it was the truth. But growing up, my mother never apologized to me, so I wanted to be sure that they could see that I could admit when I was wrong and ask their forgiveness. And that was so powerful in disarming the situation.
I think a game changer for me in that conversation was with Mackenzie, and how I was able to meet her differently was I did not take her behavior personally. And that changed the game for me in parenting. Like, they're not misbehaving personally towards me. They're misbehaving because they're children, and they're supposed to. And it's my job to parent them, not take the invitation to behave like them. They're doing what they're supposed to do, and it's not an offense towards me. Nor is it a reflection of me, you know, which I felt like sometimes it is, like I'm being a bad mom because they're behaving like this. If I was a good mom, they would be good kids, but that's not true. You know, they're kids. They're supposed to be pushing limits, breaking things, like refining you, you know? And to not take it personally can take your emotions out, and you can separate, okay, and you can parent versus engage.
I love that. And I'm sure most of us have heard the verse in Proverbs to train up a child in the way he should go. And I think I'm married to a coach, and I think the idea of training, if you have your children in sports or you played sports, your expectation as the athlete is that the coach is going to instruct you, right? And I think the coach has the idea that you're going to come and be instructed too, and they're going to show you and they're going to shift, and it's a process. And I think we really need to look at that language in that verse and our roles that way too. Like, we are coaching this behavior as to where it's going to go in the future, and we should expect them to be children, and they are expecting to be parented. And I think so often that, you know, in the moment and like in the circumstance, that is not necessarily what's on our minds. And just kind of just to follow in that is the idea of, where did you find room in this tiredness or in the noise and the mess to really kind of disciple and not just correct behaviors? You know, sit down, stand up, no, but actually a little bit deeper. How did you feel like that worked out in your family? Or still working out, 'cause if you have, you know, older children, teenagers.
I try to look at...
Because we're all headed that direction.
Yeah, you're all coming on the train. You just buckle up.
Yeah.
I try to look at, even at my 6-year-olds, I try to look at like the big picture. This is going to be a human in the adult world. What are you trying to cultivate? What are you going to give to the world? And that kind of puts some pressure on me in my mind. But that's always in the forefront of my mind. Like, this has to be a functional adult in society, and it's my job to kind of make sure that happens. I don't really know how I do it. But I do a ton of talking. As you can tell. Ton of talking.
Can I ask you a quick question? Do you feel like you do that talking in the moment or at other times?
both. I usually do my overreacting in the moment. But my kids know I'm kind of famous for, like, I always come back. And here's what I make very, very, very clear to my kids, and especially my teenagers, because they don't always understand, you know, when they're 6, why mommy gets so upset and why she's trying to teach you not to run out in front of the car, you know. But I always say to my kids, very clearly and as like impassioned as I can, I would run through fire on broken glass to save you from yourself. I say that to my teenagers because I'm your mom and I love you and I will do whatever it takes. Even if you don't like me, you don't have to. It's okay, I don't like me sometimes too. But I love you. And now at 15, my daughter is like, I know you're not trying to keep me from something because you just want to, or trying to be controlling. I know you love me. So I think making that clear, like, I'm doing this because I love you, and I try to say it as impassioned as I can because it's true. And she receives sort of correction and direction in that a lot easier, but I do both. I overreact, I always come back to have a conversation.
I think as the kids got older, it was kind of nice to be able to involve them in the process. We would have family meetings, and if there was things that, you know, were bugging me that was happening, or a routine that wasn't working, then we'd sit down and talk about it together, and getting them, I loved when they were able to put some input in it, and a lot of times they'd have really good ideas that I didn't think of, so that they could be part of the process of, you know, getting those things figured out.
I think as they hit adolescence and definitely in their teen years, prayer became so critical to me because your interaction or control over them has changed. The dynamic of your relationship has changed, and especially when they started going to public high school in Chicago. They'd gone to a small Christian school through 8th grade, through their elementary years, and then to transition to a public high school in a very large city was overwhelming to me, to let them go and have to release them. And so all of those things, I think prayer changed my perspective, that I saw that I was releasing them, I was entrusting them to the Lord, and that's what He wanted. He wanted me to be more dependent upon Him and less trying to control a situation. And here it was totally out of my control. I couldn't walk to school with them, I couldn't drive them. I used to drive them and pick them up previously, like most of you do. But suddenly all of that changed. They were taking public transportation. It was just one change after another. And if I couldn't release them to the Lord, then I would be too overwhelmed. I couldn't function. The fear factor was so huge. So that generated a lot of conversation too, as we talked about where they're going to be and what they can expect to see. And I'm sure I don't know everything that they encountered, but that's all right. God knows, and He brought them through. So I started keeping a prayer journal when they were in their adolescent years all the way through. And it really helped me to pray specific things for them and my reaction. I'm very emotional, so I react emotionally. I can't go to Zeke's basketball games. John sits there very quietly, and my husband most of the time, and I'm like so into this, and if I see something wrong, I want to jump in and take care of it. And poor Johnny's like, oh, my mom, she's going to embarrass me. But, so my first response is always emotional, and God has taught me that I have to draw back and submit my children to Him and to His care.
It's one of the biggest refining moments. I think that's one of the biggest refining moments in motherhood, is that they're not really yours. And it takes a little while to get to that realization because that baby is yours. You know, but when you have to sort of let them go, and especially today, they have all these things that are, it's hard to control. You really do have to sort of, in a lot of ways, be a good mom, but trust that the Lord is with them too, because they face a lot today.
That just kind of reminds me of the verse in Galatians where it says, let us not become weary in doing good. And I really think we can add a little to that. In doing good parenting, doing all this work over the years. Because it says at the proper time, we'll reap a harvest if we do not give up. But in that moment when you're wanting to give up, I think that's where we create some space for the Lord. So how in all of the things that we as mothers have to do, how did you find time to create that space, to fill your cup, to be able to actually give gentleness and kindness and the fruit of the Spirit back out to your children? How did you find that time? I don't have time.
I had a realization that I'm not a single mother. They have a dad. So, and he's not babysitting, and actually I'm really blessed in that area because sometimes I feel like he does more than me. So, but some people aren't comfortable with leaving their husband, the father, with this kid. They can't take care of him in the same way you can, and that's true. It's different. Dads are different. They're gonna hold him upside down and throw him around, but they'll be okay. When my twins were 5 months old, I learned how to play tennis. And I don't know that I could have made it through that period if I didn't have something for myself. And then I was like, okay, now I'm going to learn how to use essential oils. Then I taught myself how to bake bread. I have to have something outside of just them to take, to give me some happiness. And those yeast rolls were delicious. And I was very happy I learned how to do that. So I think always learning and being creative and whatever is creative for you, talking to friends, get out of the house. You don't have to be, secluded in there alone. I cover all the things.
No, I did. No.
Done. We've got nothing. Okay. Wow.
You did it all.
And our theme, like I said, there's a lot of preparation that comes before, and it just kind of came to us yesterday. And our theme this year has been fire, and I just couldn't resist but want to read this to you that Jennifer's sister actually sent to her, who probably has no idea that we're talking about this or anything. But they're looking at, if you've ever watched silver or something being refined, and it just said the woman, as they were learning about it, the woman thought about God holding us in such a hot spot. And then she thought again about that verse, that he sits as a refiner and purifier of silver. So she asked the silversmith, is that true that he had to sit there in front of that fire that entire time the silver was being refined? The man looked and said, yes, and explained that he not only had to sit there holding the silver, but he had to keep his eyes on the silver the entire time it was in the fire. If the silver was left even a moment too long in the flames, it would be damaged. The woman was silent for a moment. Don't make me cry. The woman was silent for a moment, and then she asked the silversmith, how do you know when the silver is fully refined? He smiled at her and answered, oh, that's easy, when I see my image in it. And I just thought that was so powerful, that we're in that hot spot, and motherhood is that hot spot, but he's looking for his image, and he'll be there. And as we refine us, is there any clear moments where you see, wow, especially looking back? I don't think when you're in the fire, you see the refinement until afterwards.
I think on that question a second.
You got one, Jan?
Say it again. Any clear moments?
Yeah, just any moments where or anything in life where you really felt like, had you not gone through this hot spot, you don't know that you would have been refined. Or another imagery would be if you think of sharp edges on furniture or a piece of wood, as a carpenter takes sandpaper and smooths that and rounds that out. So either image, how do you feel, or something where you feel like there's no way you would have been refined or smoothed out had you not sat through that hot spot and had the Lord with his eye on you? That's a big question.
I think just having children, the whole process of it, and seeing, one thing I want to say is that you're not alone. We all experience this, and you may look at the panel and say, oh, well, they've made it to this point, or you talk to someone at your table or a friend and they seem to have it all together. And it's just not true. We're all experiencing some struggles, but there is a place where we progress through that, where we understand more of what God is doing in our lives. And so we make some progress. We look back. For some of us, for me, it took a longer time. I just was so set in my ways. My husband was a pastor. It was a church plant in the city, and I thought, oh, well, my children should be and act a certain way. But you know what? They were fine, and no one put any expectations on them. So, it's all in this process. It's different for us, the factors that refine us. But as mothers, it's what God is doing, and it's a high calling. One thing that when I was reading a book called High Call, High Privilege by Gail McDonald, it was in the 80s, before some of you were born, most of you. But she said something that really stuck out to me. She began to see, and she was a pastor's wife, that her children were her first ministry. And that really was an eye-opener to me. Here I was, totally throwing myself into our church and the women and people and the kids and everyone and the families. And then I had to step back and realize most of my prayer, my energy, it has to come there. They have to be first, beyond, and there's so many more things out there even today that we can give ourselves to. But that was just such an eye-opener, and I felt like God was turning my face like our kids do, to look at them, to see that my children, they're my first ministry, not anything else. Everything else comes after that, but they're my first ministry. And yeah, we're frustrated. We don't want to be labeled. We don't want to be known as just a mother, but it's what we are. And motherhood calls for sacrifice.
Grace.
And we need God's mercy, God's grace, to be able to accept that. But it's a sacrifice. And I wasn't I was ill-prepared to make that sacrifice. But it is. And that's what God's called us. Where the calling on our lives is to be a mother. Yes, there'll be many other things, but we can't distance ourselves from that fact.
Jan and I have talked about how we wish we had had a moms group when we were your age, and so using this support system is such a great thing for you all. Being a mother is hard. I was a special education teacher, and I still say being a parent was the hardest job I ever had, and yet it was one of the most rewarding. So use your support systems, keep with your prayers, and you will be fine.
And I think too,
Maybe come over. Here, use hers. Okay, use hers. Your battery's there you go.
when I'll just stand, but not in front of other people. I think when you asked the previous question about how do you disciple your children, I really was like, I do not have anything great to say to these people, and it's an area where I feel a lot of guilt, along with the anger. But I think that I was reminded, there's a verse in Isaiah, which I don't know the reference, where it talks about God gently leads those who are caring for the young. And sometimes I feel like, Lord, I'm just a big mom failure. And it's even a running joke with my husband and I. He's like, add it to your list of failures, because I'll be like, and I didn't even teach them Bible verses. But I think that God is, he's more gentle with us than we realize. And yes, he wants us to grow. He wants us to be refined. He wants us to lead our children and our families well, but he also is tender towards us. You do you. Like, Melissa Caney, you told me once, like, after Christmas, we take all our Christmas cards and we put them in a bowl on our table and we pray for all those families. I have a full bowl of Christmas cards on my table today. What is this, April whatever? And I'm like, we are going to pray for these people, and I'm going to teach my children love others, and those stupid Christmas cards are still in the napkin bowl on my table. So, just to encourage you, like, you may not feel like you're doing anything to disciple your table, and you may not be, your children, and you may not be doing it the way that other people are doing it, but God is using you, God is gentle with you, God is growing you. It's so hard to see when you're in it, and it's even hard to see, I'm like maybe 10 years ahead of y'all. It's even hard for me to see, but I know that I've grown and changed. I know that I've matured. And I know that he's made me less selfish than I was. I'm still pretty selfish, but he's doing something in you. Even if you don't feel like you're growing, even if you feel like you're failing, he's using you. He picked you to mother those children, not somebody else. So just trust in that and go to him, and he'll help you.
Thank you so much, ladies. I hope that you all feel like you have some tools, some actual responses, and just some overall encouragement of how to proceed. Because in a few moments, you're right back in there. And you actually have a little time right now to kind of reset. And so I want to real quick thank the panel, if we could give them a round of applause. And then we're gonna, as they walk out, we're gonna introduce kind of as we